The rope screams. It is a sound unlike anything else in nature. A high-pitched, tearing shriek produced by 3-inch thick braided haw bark grinding against the porous surface of volcanic rock. It is pitch black, save for the flickering light of torches soaked in fish oil that cast long, dancing shadows against the cliff face. 100 men are leaning forward at a 45-degree angle, their feet digging into the wet clay, their muscles coiling like steel cables under sweat-slicked skin. The air is thick, suffocatingly humid, and smells of ozone and crushed grass. Somewhere in the darkness, a master engineer screams a command in a language that has been isolated from the rest of the human species for 5 centuries. The ground shakes, not from an earthquake, though this is a land of sleeping volcanoes, but from the impact of 80 tons of stone slamming back against the earth. They are moving a god, and the god is resisting. Consider this moment. Stand in the mud with these men. Look up at the silhouette blocking out the stars. It is 30 feet tall. It weighs as much as a Boeing 737. It has no wheels, it has no cranes, it has no beasts of burden, no oxen, no horses, no elephants. There is only wood, stone, fiber, and the terrifying focused will of the human mind. How did they do it? How did a small group of people, stranded on the single most isolated speck of land on the planet, completely cut off from the collective knowledge of civilizations like Egypt, China, or Rome, develop the engineering capacity to move mountains? And more hauntingly, why? What possessed them to carve nearly 1,000 of these giants, consuming their forests and their society in the process? Was it an act of supreme devotion or a slow-motion suicide pact with their own environment? To understand the answer, we must strip away the myths of aliens and magic. We must look at the blisters on the hands of the carvers. We must look at the geometry of the roads. We must look into the vacant eyes of the Moai to see the reflection of a tragedy that warns us about our own future. This is not just a story about statues. This is the story of human ingenuity pushed to its absolute breaking point. Before the first chisel struck stone, there was the ocean. To understand the engineering of the statues, you must first understand the engineering of the voyage. The story begins not on the island, but thousands of miles to the west, in the vast, terrifying emptiness of the Pacific. Around the year 1200, a double-hulled canoe, perhaps 60 feet long, lashed together with coconut fiber and caulked with breadfruit sap, cut through the swells. On board was a man named Hotu Matua. History remembers him as a king, but psychologically, he was something far more complex, a desperate refugee or a visionary explorer, gambling the lives of his clan on a dream. The navigation required to find this island is a feat of intellect that rivals the mathematics of the Apollo program. Without a compass, without a sextant, these navigators read the diffraction patterns of waves reflecting off distant islands. They read the temperature of the water currents with their testicles. They followed the migration paths of birds that shouldn't be there. When they finally spotted the cloud formation that hangs perpetually over the island, a stationary cumulus cloud created by the heat rising from the landmass, they found a triangular rock roughly the size of Washington, D.C. This was Tepito o Tehenua, the navel of the world. It was a paradise. Pollen samples from deep crater lakes reveal that when Hotu Matua stepped onto the white sands of Anakena Beach, he did not find a barren grassland. He walked into a subtropical palm forest. Millions of palm trees, some reaching 100 feet high, with trunks 6 feet in diameter, covered the volcanic slopes. This forest is the silent, missing character in the story of the statues. Without this forest, there is no rope. Without the forest, there are no sleds.
Without the forest, the statues do not move. The tragedy of Rapa Nui is written in the rings of trees that no longer exist. As the society settled, a unique geological opportunity presented itself. The island is formed by 3 volcanoes, Teravaka, Poiki, and Rano Kau. But it is a smaller crater, Rano Raraku, that became the womb of the gods. Rano Raraku is not just a quarry, it is an industrial complex of the ancient world. If you walk into the crater today, you feel a shift in the atmosphere. The wind dies down, the sound of the ocean fades. You are surrounded by the gaze of nearly 400 unfinished statues, some half-buried, some still attached to the bedrock. It looks like a workshop that was abandoned only an hour ago. The stone here is lapilli tough, compressed volcanic ash. It is relatively soft when first cut, but hardens upon exposure to air. This specific geological quirk is the key. If the stone had been basalt, too hard to carve with stone tools, the Moai would not exist. If it had been scoria, too brittle, they would have crumbled. The tough was perfect. But the tools were not metal. They used toki, handheld chisels made of basalt, a harder volcanic rock found elsewhere on the island. Imagine the kinetics of this work. A carver would hold a heavy basalt toki and strike the tough. Click, dust, click, dust, thousands of times an hour. 10 hours a day for a year. A single statue required a team of masters working in concert. They didn't just hack away, they followed a strict architectural blueprint. The nose had to be a specific ratio to the chin. The earlobes had to be elongated. The hands, resting on the belly, had to feature long, tapering fingers. This was not folk art. This was high-precision manufacturing. Let us delve into the life of a master carver. He was an elite member of society, exempt from the brutal work of farming or fishing. He was fed the best tuna and the choicest sweet potatoes. His hands were his livelihood, but also his connection to the spiritual realm. When he carved, he was not creating a sculpture, he was creating a vessel. The belief was that these statues were to hold mana, supernatural power. But the mana would not enter the stone until the eyes were opened late in the process. In the quarry, the carver worked in a narrow trench, sometimes only 2 feet wide, carving the back of a giant that lay prone. The heat in these trenches would have been stifling, easily reaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit as the black rock absorbed the midday sun. The dust would have coated their lungs, leading to early respiratory failure, a sacrifice of the body for the glory of the ancestors. The sheer volume of stone removed is staggering. We are talking about millions of cubic feet of rock, chipped away by hand, carried out in woven baskets, and dumped in spoil heaps that are now hills themselves.
Then comes the impossible task, the transport. This is the subject of arguably the most heated debate in archaeology. How do you move a 10, 20, or even 80-ton statue from the quarry to the coast, sometimes 10 miles away, over uneven volcanic terrain? Early European explorers assumed they used rollers, tree trunks acting as wheels. This is the sediment of logic that Western minds apply. We use wheels, so they must have used wheels. And this theory leads to the idea of ecocide, that they cut down every tree to make rollers, destroying their environment to move their idols. But the oral history of the Rapa Nui people says something different. They say the statues walked. For centuries, this was dismissed as a fairy tale,
But in new experiments, a new truth has emerged that aligns perfectly with the physics of the statue's design. The Moai are not perfectly balanced cylinders. Their center of gravity is low and forward. Their bellies protrude. Their bases are not flat, but curved. They are designed like weeble-wobble toys. If you tie 3 ropes to the head, one to the left, one to the right, one to the rear, and you coordinate a team of people to rock the statue, it takes a step. It lurches forward. Heave, step, heave, step. This explains the vertical nature of the transport. It explains why the statues found abandoned on the roads are lying on their faces or their backs, as if they toppled while standing. It also reframes the ecocide narrative. You don't need thousands of logs to make a road of rollers. You need ropes made from the bark of the hau tree, and you need a clean path. It was a feat of harmonic motion, a dance between gravity and human sweat. Once the statue arrived at the ahu, the stone platform usually facing inland to watch over the village, the engineering challenge shifted from transport to erection. They had to lift these leviathans onto a pedestal often 6 feet high. Without pulleys, without hydraulics, they likely used ramp systems, building a mountain of stones and earth, dragging the Moai up the ramp, and then slowly tilting it into place by removing the ramp stones stone by stone. The precision required here is terrifying. A single slip, a single rope snapping, and a year's worth of work shatters. And the cost of failure was not just a broken stone, it was a broken spirit. A fallen Moai was considered dead. It had lost its mana. It was left where it fell. You can see them today, the fallen warriors of this industrial crusade, returning to the grass. The final touch was the eyes. This is the moment the statue became a god. We only recently discovered this. For decades, we saw the Moai as hollow-eyed skeletons. But in 1978, a fragment of white coral was found. It was an eye. The iris was made of red scoria or black obsidian. When these eyes were placed into the sockets, the psychological effect on the villagers must have been profound. Imagine a dark, moonless night. The firelight flickers. Suddenly, the white coral catches the light, and the ancestor stares back at you. It stares with judgment, with protection, with authority. The statue is no longer stone, it is alive. It is the repository of the clan's lineage.
But the story of construction is also a story of destruction. The obsession with bigger, more massive statues, an arms race, ancestor worship between clans, pushed the island's carrying capacity to the brink. The pollen records show the palm forests vanishing. The rats, introduced by the first canoes, ate the palm nuts, preventing the forest from regenerating. The humans cut the trees for fuel, for canoes, for housing, and yes, for the machinery of the Moai. The soil eroded, the crop yields fell, the birds which had nested in the trees disappeared. The silence of the forest was replaced by the wind howling over barren grasslands. And then the construction stopped. It didn't taper off, it crashed. In the quarry at Rano Raraku, there are statues that are 90% finished, with tools left beside them, as if the workers were called away to lunch and never returned. What happened? A shift in the fundamental theology of the island occurred. The Birdman cult emerged. As resources grew scarce and warfare erupted between the clans, warfare evidenced by the sudden appearance of mata'a, obsidian spear points, the people turned away from the ancestors who had failed to protect the environment. They turned to a new competition. At the village of Orongo, perched on a precipice 1,000 feet above the crashing ocean, a new ritual began. It was not about building the biggest stone, it was about physical endurance and survival.
Young men would climb down the sheer cliff, swim through shark-infested waters to the islet of Motu Nui, wait for the sooty tern to lay its first egg, and swim back. The winner's clan would rule the island for a year. The era of the engineers was over. The era of the warriors had begun. The final act of the Moai was not their construction, but their toppling. When Europeans first arrived in 1722, Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, he reported seeing the statue standing, but by the time Captain Cook arrived in 1774, many were toppled. They were not blown over by wind, they were pushed. They were pushed face down to break their noses, to blind them, to kill the mana of the rival clan. The great engineering works were dismantled by the very descendants of the people who built them. It was a cultural reboot, a rejection of the past. Today, when you stand before the 15 restored Moai at Ahu Tonariki, you are looking at a resurrection. In the 1990s, with the help of Japanese cranes and archaeologists, these giants were lifted once more. They stand against the sunrise, their long shadows stretching across the grass. They remain the most potent symbol of human ambition on Earth. They remind us that we are capable of impossible feats of creation, creating beauty that outlasts empires. But they also stand as a warning. They remind us that a society that ignores the limits of its environment, that consumes its future to glorify its past, is destined to fall. The Moai are not just statues, they are mirrors. And as we look into their weathered faces, we must ask ourselves, what are we building today? And what will be left of it when the forests are gone?